The Washington Commanders took a 48-18 loss last night against the New England Patriots in their preseason opener. Who stood out for the right reasons? Who stood out for the wrong reasons? And what are some of our main takeaways? I'm Matthew Heiserman, your host of the Rays Hail Report, and today we are joined by Sophie Weller of Patriots Wire. Sophie, it's great to have you on.
Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. And, getting right into it, first and foremost, what was your initial impression on Mike Vrabel last night? This was obviously his first game as the Patriots head coach.
Yeah, I think that it was a good impression. Definitely seemed like I will say the main thing that stood out to me, I think, was just the penalties. Last season, that was a huge issue for the Patriots, and
Mhm,
he's clearly getting it through that that's not acceptable. And I think
mhm,
it's just a stricter regime in a way, but it's working
mhm,
out really well. And I think it was, yes, it's the preseason, but it was a very good first
mhm.
game for Mike Vrabel.
Absolutely. And then, TreVeyon Henderson really stole the show last night. He had a carry for 18 yards, 3 receptions for 12 yards, and then that 100-yard kick return touchdown on the first play of the game. What really stood out to you about his performance last night?
Speed.
Mhm,
That
mhm,
was the biggest thing with TreVeyon Henderson is that, we've talked about his speed all preseason
mhm,
and even when he was first drafted, but to really see it in a game situation. And the other thing too is his versatility. Yes, you
mhm.
drafted him as a running back, but he's a pass catcher too. Drake can throw him the ball and he's going to get that. And I think that's a weapon for the Patriots that they're going to really need to use this season to be successful.
I think one thing I noticed is that he doesn't only like contact, but he delivers contact. Like, he will never shy away from contact. That's something he's always initiating. And I think going back to that kick return touchdown, Washington's special teams was all over the place in this game. They gave up multiple kick return or long kick returns that one, and then Antonio Gibson got one over 60 yards. Matt Gay missed his first field goal attempt, and he's the highest paid kicker in the NFL. So not the best showing for Washington's special teams. But then Johnny Newton forced a fumble on Drake May in the first quarter. I guess how much did that? We got a limited sample size for May, so how much did that fumble, I guess, overshadow what he did throughout the rest of the time he was out there last night?
Yeah, unfortunately, I think that's the main takeaway for
Mhm,
Drake May because it was such a small sample size. And as Mike Vrabel said in his post-game press
mhm,
conference, he can't do that. He knows better. And that's the truth. It was trying, just take the sack at that point,
mhm,
unfortunately, but he was trying to get rid of the ball and it just didn't work out. Um, and with that, there's also some growing pains because in the play, Newton got past the two rookies on the offensive line. He got past Will Campbell and he
mhm.
got past Jared Wilson.
Yep.
And that's in a unique situation right there because you don't normally have two rookies starting
Mhm, mhm.
next to
Yes.
each other on the offensive line. So
Yeah.
again, that's some growing pains, and I'm glad Drake's making that mistake now rather than week 1 or
Mhm,
week 17, whatever it may be. So yeah, unfortunately, because of such a small sample size, and it also seemed like they were running the ball a lot while he
mhm,
was out in the field. That's the main takeaway.
mhm.
That's really what you're gonna look at when you
Yeah.
look at Drake May's performance in this preseason game.
And then sticking with the offensive line, as you mentioned, both teams in this game drafted an offensive lineman in the first round, Will Campbell for New England, Josh Connerly Jr. for the Commanders.
Yeah.
What were your key takeaways from both of those guys last night?
Will Campbell finishes his tackles. That was my main
Yeah.
takeaway. There was a video I reposted on Twitter, and it was him just, like, completely shoving a guy,
Mhm.
like,
Yeah.
10, 20 yards to the end, and, he's someone who he's not giving up. He's not giving up on the play till the whistle
Mhm.
blows, and that's a really important quality to have in your, offensive lineman in a first round, and as everyone has said, he's one of the most coachable players they have on this team right now,
Mhm.
and, one thing that stood out to me recently was when we were speaking with Keon White. Keon had mentioned how, like, if when they go up against each other in one-on-ones during training
Mhm.
camp, and Keon White has come away with a win more often than not,
Mhm.
but Campbell will go up to him and be like, "Okay, so what did you see from me on that play? How can I be
Mhm.
better?"
Yeah.
And that's huge. That's huge from
Mhm.
your rookie to be going and asking those questions, and it's just a good sign, and I don't think right now no one's talking about arm length anymore.
Yeah, yeah. And then besides Jalen Polk, who left the game early with an apparent shoulder injury, were there any guys for New England that you kind of wish you saw a little more from last night?
Yeah, Kyle Williams was one,
Mhm, mhm,
that I think he the he stood out in a good way because he was, getting separation from all the DBs that he was going up against, really.
mhm,
Unfortunately, it was just maybe the throws weren't there, because he didn't get a single target when Drake was in the game. And I
mhm.
think that's was one of the things that was really missed was just not getting the opportunity to see him with Drake, um, and seeing maybe that more accurate
Yeah,
passing, whatever
yeah.
that could be. So
Mhm,
that was probably the main thing, that stood out to me offensively was just not getting that opportunity to see him.
mhm. I think for Washington, it was really just most of the wide receivers that you were expecting to be there that weren't. Jalen Lane did nothing. He had 1 target, 0 receptions. Ben Sennett, the second year tight end, didn't really have an opportunity to do anything last year because of how well Zach Ertz did. Ertz did better than anyone could have expected last year. And then you have Yankoff and Bates who kind of handle the blocking aspect. So I thought this was a good opportunity, and he just didn't show what I wanted him to. And then Luke McCaffrey also during the time he was out there, although he went into the locker room as well because apparently he was feeling under the weather. And then who were some more, I guess, under the radar players for New England that really stole the show yesterday?
Yeah, I mean, I think everyone's talking about TreVeyon Henderson.
Mhm.
Efton Chisholm, he's
Yeah.
been a fan favorite since,
Mhm.
OTAs. He was one that stood out, and he's had a quieter training camp,
Mhm.
which has come at a bit of a surprise, but
Mhm.
what really stood out there was, like, he had the most receptions. He was the top receiver last night when you look at the stats.
Yep.
He had the touchdown, all that, so, it was nice to see him kind of, like, step up and show what we saw so early on, but we haven't seen yet. Um, Another one was obviously you gotta go Will Campbell and Jared Wilson. Yes,
Mhm.
they had their mistakes, but they were holding their own. Um, the defensive line, the front seven is gonna
Yep.
be so huge for the Patriots this
Mhm.
year. It's hard not to just shout them out at every chance you get
Yep.
because they're just Milton Williams, Keon White, Christian Barmore, Kyrie's Tonga, like, there are others, but it's just that's, like, the first that comes to my mind that's just
Mhm. Mhm.
I don't know, compared to what happened last season, it's, like, not it's okay to be excited finally
Yeah.
about, like,
Yeah.
that front seven. And
Definitely.
then Alex Austin and DJ James, 2 cornerbacks, with Christian Gonzalez and Carlton Davis out, which are your presumed
Mhm.
starting cornerbacks. It's giving the players that would probably be used at, like, a more depth, the opportunities and
Mhm.
seeing what they're capable of. And that's a huge one too right there, is that, a lot of people were unsure about the cornerback depth, but I think that it's looking pretty good. Alex Austin going into this year has been really solid. He didn't get a true chance last season, he was
Mhm.
injured, but to come in and he's taking advantage of every rep. And DJ James, that's someone who no one had on their radar, comes into
Mhm.
training camp and has been one of the main standouts. So, those are a few that I would say definitely, stock up.
Mhm. Yeah. And then throughout the entire game, Washington had 13 penalties for 98 yards. New England had just 2 penalties for 15 yards. And I think there were some bad calls that went both ways. Like, for instance, that Jeremy Reeves hit probably shouldn't have been unnecessary roughness. I think I forget the player, but there was one clear defensive pass interference on
Kyle
Washington.
Williams.
Yep,
Yes.
that was not called on the deep ball to Kyle Williams. So I guess how much do you think the penalties for Washington and I guess lack thereof for the Patriots played into the outcome of this game?
Yeah, I mean, I speaking from experience, the
Mhm.
Patriots were a team that committed a lot of penalties in the
Yeah.
last years, and it was just especially last year, and you see how that affects a game. It's huge.
Mhm.
Look at the score, 48-18, like, of
Mhm.
course it's gonna affect a game. So,
Mhm.
I think that that's just discipline, that's, making sure Dan Quinn, I'm sure, is gonna go back. to practice this week and
Yeah.
raise hell
Mhm.
on them.
Mhm.
But it's the same way, like, Mike Vrabel does not put up with that stuff. It's a stricter coach, Belichick one. I remember my first training camp I covered was Belichick's final year, and one of the things that stood out is, like, if a player does, like, a false start, if a player does any of that, they're doing a
Mhm.
lap around the field.
Mhm.
Um, Penalties, yeah, you're doing a lap, and
Mhm.
the coaching staff doesn't stand for that, and they're
Yeah.
gonna nip that in the bud right away. So that was probably the biggest thing was just you can see both sides of the equation because if you were watching the Patriots
Mhm.
last year, you saw how that affected more false start penalties than we knew
Mhm.
what to do with, and
Yeah.
now this. So, yeah, penalties will always factor into a game, and you saw it last night.
So then we also saw 2 bad drops from Chris Moore early in the game, another drop from KJ Osborne in the end zone, and, very underwhelming performances from both Jalen Lane and Luke McCaffrey, as I mentioned. How much pressure do you think was added on Washington to pay Terry before the start of the season after seeing how poor this wide receiver room was? And I guess, do you feel like Terry maybe now has more leverage on Adam Peters and the rest of the front office now that they kinda know we need him in order for this offense to really produce?
Yeah, I mean, I think the pressure was on before because you're talking about you have Jaden Daniels at quarterback,
Mhm.
and you gotta give him a solid weapon because that's one of
Yeah.
the better quarterbacks in the league. He showed that last year. Rookie season led them to the playoffs, but on top so he already had the leverage there, but then to go into this game and see maybe our depth at the position
Mhm.
is really lacking, and we don't have if Jaden's throwing the ball, we're not sure that they're gonna be able to catch the ball. And that right there but, if that
Mhm.
ball goes near Terry McLaurin, there's 90%, 99% chance that he's making that play.
Yeah.
And that right there is gonna put more pressure on them with the season coming up is just seeing, "Yikes, this did not go how we wanted it to go.
Mhm.
We don't really have anyone else."
And I mean, you can play the quarterback game all you want in terms of there was Sam Hartman out there, but a lot of the passes that were dropped were really good throws from Sam Hartman, which was definitely a bit concerning, especially that Chris Moore was one of the guys who people were really talking highly of during training camp and saying he could be a sneaky guy to make that 53-man roster. And then Hartman played almost the entire first half. He completed 9 of 19 passes for 64 yards, 0 touchdowns, 1 interception. How would you grade his performance, I guess, from A to F, also considering the fact that he didn't really, get too many favors from his wide receivers?
Yeah, I mean, given that situation, I'd probably go, like, B minus because as you said, some of the passes were very accurate. But I think you also do have to factor in the stat line, and it's
Mhm.
as much as it's hard, you know, when you look at it would be the same if I was talking about Drake May, if he had 20 attempts and all of them were
Mhm.
perfect throws, but his receivers dropped 10 of them, you'd still
Yeah.
be like, "Well, what happened there?" So,
Mhm.
I think it was good, and he definitely looks like a good backup quarterback option for the Commanders, but you need to work on the depth at wide receiver because if
Mhm.
it's not fair to your quarterback, it's not fair to the rest of the team that you're an NFL receiver. If the ball comes in your hands, you gotta make that catch.
Mhm.
There's really no excuse you can use for that.
Mhm. And then a rough interception from Hartman as well. Clearly a miscommunication between him and the wideout, but nonetheless, I don't think he put enough power on that pass either way. And then you look at Ja'Cory Croskey-Merritt. He entered the blue medical tent for Washington right before halftime. I know he was one of the guys who many people were extremely excited to watch. Were you impressed with what you saw from Bill real early in the game?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that there was definitely the best part about preseason is there's things that went really well,
Mhm.
and there's things that you can work on. Um, and there's still 2 more games to go until the
Mhm.
regular season begins, and I think that's crucial in every element to every single player who
Yeah.
steps foot on the field. Because, even Drake May, everyone's like, "This is our guy, this is the
Mhm.
quarterback of the future," but it's like, "Look at that fumble." That's a
Mhm.
big mistake to make. Thank God he made it in the first preseason game and not again, week 1 against the Raiders when
Yeah.
the game counts.
Mhm.
So I think that's just important to remember for every single player.
Mhm. And I think when he was out there, even though he didn't play too much, I saw a lot of nice cuts from him. I saw a lot of explosiveness and not going down after that first contact, which I did like. And then I guess my final question, what were some of the main differences you noticed when Josh Johnson went in at quarterback uh in the second half instead of Sam Hartman out there?
I mean, I think it's in a way, it's hard because I think Hartman's the clear second, the clear
Mhm.
option behind Jaden Daniels, but
Mm,
then again, Hartman kinda had a harder, go of things because he was going
mhm,
up against the Patriots starters,
mhm,
for that first quarter or for a few reps there and all that, so, um, but they were getting he was going up against the 2nd, 3rd, 4th stringers in that second half, they got some points on the board, and it was
mhm,
coming back a little bit, but the big difference it's hard to say again because 'cause they're going up
mhm.
against different players, it's so hard
Yeah.
in the preseason, but I think that it shows that they do have some depth at that position, I mean, there's always gonna be things here, and, it's the biggest thing too was, like, in joint practices. That's the true test there is
Mhm,
to see that because, again, you're going up it just depends on who you're going up against,
mhm,
um,
mhm,
situation, like, if you were to throw Josh in week 1, he might not have looked as good as he did last
yeah,
night when he was, playing
mhm,
against, the, Patriots'
mhm,
2nd, 3rd, 4th team, uh,
mhm,
but, no, I think that you put him in, and considering that you really didn't have any points on the board, and he came back
mhm.
and he put some points on the
Yep.
board, a promising given what the game was and how much the Patriots were kinda dominating
Mhm.
offensively, it was a promising stat to get some points on the board.
And I mean, it's a different perspective when you're talking about a second-year quarterback versus a 39-year-old veteran. And then even Johnson had his mistakes. He overthrew one pass to Jacoby Jones, the UDFA, and that ended up being an interception, not his best throw. And then, I just feel like it's really tough, as you mentioned, to evaluate guys, when they're not going up against the best competition. For instance, Ben Woldridge for the Patriots, Washington's secondary was derailed by the second half, not nearly what it was in the first half when they allowed under 50 passing yards. So definitely something to consider. But with that being said, I can't thank you enough for coming on. Is there anything else you want to say to the people watching before we wrap things up?
No, I just thank you so much for having me on, this was a great time.
Yeah, of course. And where can the people watching find your work?
My bio's right down there, it's at Sophie Weller with 2 E's and 2 R's because 1 E and 1 R was taken. So that's where you can find me.
Absolutely. And if you made it up to this point, I really appreciate you tuning in. Make sure you like and subscribe. It's completely free. Helps the channel grow a ton on the road to 150 subscribers before the 2025 NFL regular season. With that being said, I'm Matthew Heiserman alongside Sophie Weller on the Race Hail Report. As always, we will see you next time.